So firstly, we're going to do a general introduction to the Creative Europe programme with a focus on the cooperation projects funding strand, the main funding strand, with regards to cultural heritage priorities. There will be lots of opportunities to go into the programme and the funding in depth. Today's is just really a taster. What we want to do is we want to give a broad understanding of the ways in which the EU significantly values, recognises and supports cultural heritage projects across Europe. And we're going to highlight some best practice examples here in Ireland. So you can begin to see yourself, you can write your own projects, write your own work into a European context. Because the one thing, and I've been in this role a long time, is the quality and kind of innovation here in Ireland with regards to the kind of museums and cultural heritage sector is so strong, and what we really want to see is increased recognition of that at EU level. So here we're going to get started, and I'm so happy, thank you COVID in some ways, that we have Grady here to present on the overall kind of European policy context for cultural heritage. She's the senior cultural heritage expert in the Commission, and we're just delighted she's here. So I'm going to start off and share her presentation and just welcome Anne here. Hold on, let me find your presentation.
Okay, right. Good morning, everyone. My name, as Katie just said it, is Anne Grady. So I'm delighted to be here and to present. I'm not sure if you can hear me clearly because I'm getting feedback when I speak.
I can hear you. There's a slight feedback, so I don't know if you want to kind of mute and then come on again.
Yeah, I'll try that because I can hear my voice coming back.
No, it's okay, I think.
Okay. No, I still hear it, but I'll continue because I know that time is running on. So to start with my second slide, Katie. Katie's going to bring me through the slides. So thank you, Katie. Very brief introduction, starting off with the policy content, running through competency, the European Year of Cultural Heritage, and then the legacy of the European Year, and then moving on to the work plan for culture, and of course, Creative Europe and all the new initiatives. Okay, so the next slide. The EU policy content text. Here you'll see a list of all the different policy initiatives and legal instruments, and I've provided the links there, so if you want further information you just have to hit it on the link. So I'm not going to go through each one, but this is just the top level ones, and of course there are more, and when you look at the links it'll bring you further and further into the EU Commission. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a key one. Sorry, just going to move something here. The European Commission's competency, and this revolves around what the Commission can actually do. Assist and complements the actions of the member states, and this is preserving, conserving and promoting Europe's cultural heritage. Sorry, the feedback is really disconcerting. And also the Commission develops relevant policies and programs, and this is where Creative Europe fits in, and supports and promotes policy collaboration between the member states, the stakeholders on cultural heritage. And that I will come back to later in the presentation. And there I've given the link about the all-important funding for cultural heritage. And I suggest that you have a look at that later when the presentation is circulated, because there's lots of information given there. If I could have the next slide, please.
Sorry, Anne, it's just froze on me there.
It's okay. Okay, So the European Year of Cultural Heritage in 2018. It was the previous slide. Okay. And this was a year, the first time ever, a year dedicated to cultural heritage, cherishing cultural heritage, promoting cultural heritage, and there was lots of initiatives conducted around Europe and further. 12.18 million participants, and Ireland alone had 782,000 participants. Ireland had 2,000 activities that were recorded and labelled. And as I said, the year was more than just the member states. It went as far as Mexico, Australia, some of the Balkans. So my next slide. I'm actually going to remove my headphones because the feedback is, as I say, a little off-putting.
Sorry, I don't know if Anne has actually disappeared here. Let me just stop. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. I wonder, should we move on? What do you think, Aoife? Should we move on and we could come back to Anne?
Yeah, I think so.
That might be the best. So Chelsea, Canavan and Deirdre Power, could I call you on now maybe to go through your presentation on your i-Portunus project and beyond? I'm not sure if you're ready.
Yes.
There's Deirdre.
Is Chelsea there?
I'm not
Yeah, we can start.
Yeah, I'm here. I can definitely start it up here. 2 seconds.
No. Just contact Anne there on the chat.
Okay.
Oh, I think I'm back on again. Hello? Hello? You can't hear me.
I can hear you. We've actually, will we go back to
Sorry
your
about that.
Yeah.
Really apologies. And this, one of the reasons I really don't like Zoom. Apologies, everyone.
I think at this point in the pandemic, everyone is so understanding of.
I know of all the technical difficulties we have.
Did you want to unplug your headphones, Anne, maybe, and just leave them out, and you can talk into the computer with the mic?
Yeah, the feedback has stopped now. Actually, okay. I think it was the camera. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to the legacy of the European year, and 4 key principles: being holistic, mainstreaming, integrated, evidence-based policymaking, and multi-stakeholder. In the framework action, and this was the legacy of the European year, there are over 65 actions, and it's one of the first times, and it's a result of the European Year of Cultural Heritage, that the Commission worked very assiduously with other Director Generals and to pull everything together on funding, on collaboration, and work with the stakeholders and the member states. So it was a very, very key year, and the legacy was very important because 2018, it came and it went, of course. And it was important to have something, a hook to develop further and to put cultural heritage in the limelight. If I could have the next slide, please. So running concurrently with the European Year of Cultural Heritage under the last work plan for culture was an open method of coordination working group on sustainable cultural tourism. An open method of coordination working group is, we call them OMCs. They're a group of experts appointed by the member states. And this particular one I led and focused very much on the balance between the access to cultural heritage and tourism. There are 55 recommendations and a number of case studies. There's about 28 case studies altogether. But one of the things the group came up with was the first ever definition of sustainable cultural tourism. And this report, while it was published in 2019, is now receiving a spotlight again when we are coming back post-COVID, looking at cultural heritage and tourism, and not going back, hopefully, to the old days where we had honeypots and where some very sensitive cultural sites were inundated with visitors. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. As I said, there were 28 case studies. Ireland featured very, very much in the OMC group. It was led by Shirley Clarkin, the Heritage Officer from County Monaghan. And we had a number of case studies with 3 case studies: Brunabonia, Newgrange, Clonmacnoise, and the Tin Church in Lara, County Monaghan. And the Tin Church very much focused on community development, and the focused on the community. I've provided a link there, so I suggest and invite you to have a look at that report. As I said, it's still very active. The next slide, please. Another legacy of the European Year is the Cultural Heritage Expert Group. During the Year of Cultural Heritage, we met with the stakeholders and representatives from the member states. And there was such an interest and enthusiasm and a real momentum. So we're building on that momentum. And this Cultural Heritage Expert Group, again, it's member states and key stakeholders. We meet twice a year and we look at the framework for action, and we see how we can promote cultural heritage, look at funding programs, and we work with other commission services such as RTD, DG Connect, DG Grow, and it's proven very, very productive. Our next meeting is in October 21. Beatrice Kelly is the Irish representative on this expert group and is very much a front runner and a great colleague to have on the group. So the next slide, please. Again, following on from the framework for action is the Cultural Heritage in Action. And this project...
Sorry, just to interrupt, Anne, I think someone is unmuted and I can hear a lot of background noise. So if everyone could just double check that they're muted, that would be great. Thank you.
Now, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, you muted me as well. Okay. Cultural Heritage in Action. Again, it's following out from the framework for action on cultural heritage, and this is a peer learning program, and it's focusing on local and regional authorities and stakeholders. 3 areas: participatory governance of cultural heritage, the reuse of cultural heritage, and the quality principles for interventions on cultural heritage, on the built cultural heritage. And if I could have the next slide, please. So there's a catalogue of 32 local and regional best practices, and this was published in November of last year. There are 12 peer learning visits taking place. I've provided a link to the Cultural Heritage in Action, and I'm inviting you to have a look at that. The catalogue and individual sheets with specific cases is there, and it includes Dublin, 14 Henrietta Street. So there is a very good Irish connection again in the Cultural Heritage in Action. And if I could have my next slide, please. Legacy again of the European Year of Cultural Heritage is Increase. And this is linking the cultural heritage sector with the cultural and creative sectors, and it's providing innovative and creative education solutions. It's a European Parliament pilot project. It started in June 2020 and it will finish in October next year, 2022. And it's under the FLIP 2 programme, Finance, Learning, Innovation and Painting. The second one there is Charter, and this is an Erasmus Plus programme. And this is looking at the skills gap in the heritage sector and looking at proposals for training and curricula for the development of new skills, and also looking at old skills, traditional skills, which we are losing for the cultural heritage professionals. The third education initiative that I've included there is the joint UNESCO EU project. And this is the first time we've ever done such a joint project. Engaging youth for an inclusive and sustainable Europe. There will be a toolkit for teachers and that will be published shortly. There's a number of webinars still continuing, and this programme will finish around June, July of this year, but everything will be available on the link that I've given there. And the next slide, please. And I had to mention COVID-19 and what's happening to the cultural heritage sector and what's happening on tourism. NEMO, the network of European museums, conducted 2 very, very good surveys of museums. And what they found that many museums were losing income because at one stage they were closed, they were partially closed, they were reopening and closing again. But the good thing that came out of this is that 4 out of 5 museums increased their digital presence. And also, as a result, saw a huge increase in online visits as well. So my next slide, please. Again, COVID and what happened and what the Commission actually did. There was a communication on tourism and transport last year. There's the Reopen EU web platform, and that's had about 6 million users. And last summer, our commissioner conducted a social media campaign dedicated to sustainable cultural tourism, and that had 18 million impressions. Europeana, the portal for cultural heritage and culture, as you're probably familiar with, increased its focus on cultural heritage and tourism. And the JRC, the Cultural Gems, had a dedicated campaign. And then recently there was a new communication from the Commission, a common path to safe and sustained reopening, and I provided a link to that. And many initiatives are now falling out from that communication. If I could have the next slide, please. So what happened with the cultural and creative sectors? 2 online platforms were set up, one for the member states and one for Creates Unite. And this is to exchange information and share best practices. The Creatives Unite was launched last year. It's been hugely successful and it's been really taken up by the industry, the cultural and creative sector. And there's over 820 contributions. It's a good exchange, a good platform for exchanging information and case studies. And the next slide, please. So the Council Work Plan for Culture 2019 to 2022. This particular work plan focuses on 6 priorities, and I'm going to talk about the first one, sustainability in cultural heritage. And this will bring me on to my next slide, please. Cultural heritage for a resilient Europe. So under this work programme, we have a number of OMC groups. These are the open method of coordination working groups that I referred to earlier, where member states are represented and have experts working on these groups to produce a report. There are 2 new ones that started this year, one on the cultural dimension of sustainable development and another on climate change. And this one on climate change, I'm very fortunately leading this one with a chair, Joanna Lesner from Germany. Ireland is represented on this OMC group with Jackie Donnelly from the Department of Housing. There's already one well-advanced OMC on high-quality architecture and the built environment, and the report and recommendations are due out shortly. And yesterday, the gender equality in the cultural and creative sectors was launched. So this is new news as such, and that will be discussed today at the Cultural Affairs Committee. So if I could have my next slide, please. So running alongside with the work plan for culture, we have the European Green Deal. And this is the Commission's commitment to tackling climate and environmental related challenges. And it's to make the EU economy sustainable. As you know, there's no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. So this brings me on very neatly and very nicely onto the OMC group that I just mentioned. The next slide, please, that I am leading on climate change. And the title of the mandate for this group is Strengthening Cultural Heritage Resilience for Climate Change. It's directly linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goal 13. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And this is its impact on cultural heritage. There's other relevant SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, as well, that are, of course, apply to our mandate. And we're also looking at the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework, the IPCC, and the Council conclusions on risk management, which were agreed last year in May under the Croatian presidency. We've had 2 meetings so far. There are 25 member states taking part, plus Norway, Switzerland, and Iceland. And this gives an indication of just how important the member states and those extra countries are taking climate change and cultural heritage seriously. I don't think there's another OMC group that's so well represented as this one. So my next slide, please. So the objectives and outcomes of this particular group is to exchange good practice, to look at current and emerging threats and impacts of climate change on cultural heritage. But it's also a 2-pronged approach. So it's looking at the contribution cultural heritage can make to mitigating and combating climate change in line with the European Green Deal's goals. It'll lead to awareness raising, capacity building, and will produce recommendations. The report should be finalised by December of next year under the Czech presidency. And the next slide, please. I have to mention the Creative Europe, the new programme. I know Katie will talk about it today, but I just wanted to add this slide because we're talking about the European Green Deal, and it's the greening of Creative Europe. All funded activities and projects will respect gender equality and the EU environmental commitments, and that's going right back to the Green Deal. And again, the press release, I've included it there. So my next slide, please. The new European Bauhaus, this also ties in to the European Green Deal, and it ties in with the open method of coordination working group that I mentioned earlier about high quality architecture. There are 3 phases: co-design, delivery, and dissemination. The JRC is running the new European Bauhaus, and they're looking for organisations all across the EU that can act as partners. And again, I'm inviting the participants here to have a look at that and maybe consider being a partner of the new European Bauhaus. So my next slide, please. This year, I don't know if you're aware, is an European Year of Rail, and we are tying in with the DG Move is organising this, and we're promoting cultural heritage along the main rail routes and cultural routes. So as you know, again, this ties in with the Green Deal because rail is sustainable, safe, and it also promotes local tourism. There's more information there provided at the link. And they're also looking for initiatives and activities. So if you know of anybody who may be interested in participating, there's a link given there. But this comes with a warning: there is no funding available from DG Move, so just to be aware of that. And my next slide, please. This is our website for further information, or if you want to have a look at anything that I've covered already. And this brings me on to my next slide. Okay, and the slide before it. Thank you. Here again is additional information, and something I thought I'd slot in here is a workshop on complementary sources of funding that we held in January of this year, which was attended by the Cultural Heritage Expert Group, and there's some really good case studies included in that if you have an interest in that particular area of funding. And what other sources of funding are there? Of course, we've got the ICOMOS quality principles, which have just been revised, the Sustainable Cultural Tourism report I've mentioned, and also tying in with the Green Deal, the European Cultural Heritage Green Paper, with Europa Nostra in cooperation with ICOMOS, the Climate Heritage Network, and members of the European Heritage Alliance. And my next slide provides other useful links, particularly in relation to COVID and what's happening on COVID, and the Creatives Unite platform that I mentioned. So this brings me to a conclusion. The next slide, please. Thank you very much. And I'm really sorry about the little technical hitch that we had there. But as Katie said, this is one of the things we have to adapt to and accept when we do things online. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I think the number of resources in your presentation alone will hopefully make up for my very poor screen share skills there. So I'm sorry about that, everyone.
No, you did very well. Thanks, Katie. You did very well.
So it's just, it's my personal albatross is Zoom at the moment, but I'm going to call on Deirdre and Chelsea now.
Thank you.
We'll move into, thanks so much, Anne. And I hope Anne will be here at the end for any questions. So, so we'll kind of have lots of time at the end, and hopefully people will have lots of questions for her. So I'm going to ask Deirdre and Chelsea to present now for our first case study. So as I said, Deirdre and Chelsea received i-Portunus, which is the European Commission's Strand for individual artist mobility. And it's interesting because they're going to tell us how it's grown and evolved from then. So thanks, guys.
Hello, my name is Chelsea, and I have shared my screen. Hopefully you can all see that properly. And I've got Deirdre here with me today as well. There she is. Oh, I can see her now. Okay, great. Okay. So I'm a multidisciplinary artist, researcher, and educator. I allow visual outcomes to be determined through a diverse process of artist-led experimentations and group engagement. As an artist researcher, I explore and experiment with ideas around belonging and ecology through pair-led relationships of social systems and belonging to place. As an educator, I work to bring out public process-based workshops and gatherings that engage with communities and individuals in dialogical approaches to understanding and engaging their own environment by bringing them into a process. And Deirdre Power is here with me today. Oh, Deirdre, for some reason I can't hear you at least.
Deirdre is on mute there, yep.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Can hear you now? Yeah.
Hello, sorry about that. Yeah, I've been working as an artist for past 30, 40 years maybe. But I graduated from Limerick College back in 1985, went to America for 20 years, studied photography in New York, and came back practically 20 years ago, completed a master's in socially engaged practice in 2011 at the Limerick School of Art and Design. And from there, for the past 10, 15 years, I've been working with communities of interest in and around Limerick City. Grew up near the water and swam in the water as a child, and it was a given that I would find myself embedded in the maritime community of Limerick. And I became involved with a project called the Island Project back in 2018. Met Chelsea through the Hunt Museum at the time. Chelsea was teaching there or working there. And through that, we forged this partnership, which is now the Water Paths and Silent Seas projects. And I suppose I have a constant presence in around the city, documenting and recording. I'm a photographer, as well as social engaged practice, and developing and established partnerships with agencies such as theatre companies, Limerick City Department of Culture and Arts, EVA, Open House, Civic Trust, Livable Limerick, Smart Cities, Corrigara Boat Club, and the Ellen Project, and the many communities that inform our social history. So welcome to our presentation, and I'll hand it over to Chelsea.
Okay, so we're going to take you guys through the journey of our i-Portunus, starting with that. So just bear with me. There we go. So as collaborative artists, the practice we have focuses on the accelerating speed of societal change amongst water communities with the evolution of obsolescence of our local culture and traditions. Our approach is an ongoing collaboration employing participatory practice and maritime heritage to connect communities of interest. Building upon an already established project, the Salmon's Wake, our objective with the i-Portunus was to extend beyond the local into a cross-European border through mobility. In the last two images, this one and the previous one, you've seen community groups engage in a heritage of the Shannon Estuary, rowing gandalos. These boats played an intrinsic part to the life and economy before the modernization of the city. The Salmon's Wake project developed as an artistic exchange of cultures and ideas with communities. Building on the connections made with local groups, we held workshops and gatherings as we developed relations between Nook, Greenland and Limerick City, literally in the wake of Ireland's only wooden sailing ship, the Island, as she made her maiden voyage to Greenland. This voyage offered an initial organic connection as an emissary for creative cultural exchange around themes and topics enveloping both these coastal communities. Themes of lost tradition, modernization, communication, and cultural change were among just a few brought into light by the project's workshops. Integrating the Creative Europe funding into the project allowed us to seek out connections further afield and through our own initiative and practices. Continuing on from the success of our exchange with Greenland, we sought to create more connections with coastal communities, seeing a need for sharing of this culture and heritage through creative connections. Initially, we connected through Bruce, an avid boat builder working with community youth groups outside the educational system. We initially explained to him that we were interested in facilitating cross-cultural networking, strengthening contacts with local and distant European communities, and introducing new communities of interest to each other through the commonality of place, creating a network of shared experience and knowledge. By way of engagement and participation with communities, we won hard yards in social space. This experience was similar with our own community in Limerick, and it allowed us to have a rite of passage. From this, we were able to engage in dialogue around life, work, experiences, challenges, and integrations. And by participating in social daily life with these groups, it gave us insight into the subtle differences and bridged a language gap in Madeira. These extended beyond just exchanging knowledge and workshopping though, and they led into the social aspects of community life from the everyday lived experiences into working and family life. The i-Portunus project aimed to maintain a space and discourse towards inclusivity. As the collective, the shared experiences foster this channel of dialogue with positive outcomes, working towards a broader narrative of creative and ecologically sustainable maritime practices. We build and maintain complex citizenship and sustainable cultural conversation around these coastal communities. The benefits of a socially engaged methodology supported by the i-Portunus grant contributes to the wellness of both the artist and the community. This residency afforded us to participate in cultural connection and exchange. Working on this European level has brought with it a more diverse opportunity of engagement, and it has opened more spaces for peer-to-peer exchange in customs and culture through those shared commonalities. Due, though, to the current pandemic and its consequent lockdowns, the practice has refocused back into Limerick at the local level, bringing with it the experience gained from the work in Madeira. by maintaining connectivity with riverine communities through shared experience of place and heritage. The project has found a way to progress. The connections developed and the commonalities learned gain knowledge and insight around what we now like to call the ecology of a community. Through the pandemic, we've expanded on this ecological aspect of the local and exploring networks and integration and the role that we all play as communities in ecology. Our practice and methodology has brought us to our most recent commission and the Water Paths Project, a community ecology archive. This is currently a contributing project to the Eco Showboat, and we're working with communities along the Shannon River catchment area. As an interdisciplinary creative project, our collaborative practice aims to visualize the intricate channels of community ecology by way of navigation upon the waterways. Much like the natural movement and evolvement of water, Water Paths traverses the intricate channels, the ecologies of people from urban to rural, from controlled and industrialized to commons and wild landscapes, and all those spaces in between. We look at existing communities of interest within these spaces, communities that remain situated despite the effects of socio-economic landscape change. Our journey along the social and ecological pathways of the river exposes new histories, our relationship to space, and all the while relying on the generosity of a free lift aboard local boats from the river's heart in Limerick City to the Grand Canal in Tullamore. As part of our collaboration and the expansion of Water Paths, we've also secured funding for an interdisciplinary creative project to visually contextualize scientific data in relation to the River Shannon. Building upon existing relationships with river catchment citizens and an already established citizen science practice, we as artists are co-creating a visual representation of the data that they have been collecting. The project aims to enable a visual narrative through uniquely designed flags where the relations between various citizen science practices, such as the Limerick Narwhal swimmers, convey a story to the broader public. And that's that so far. That's where we're at.
Thanks, Chelsea and Deirdre. That's fantastic. It's just amazing because I've heard you present this before, but you can really see the kind of common experience that kind of unites these projects. So if you think something is of interest or, an issue here, chances are you're going to find like-minded projects and people in another European country. So it's fantastic. As I said, we'll have questions at the end, but please put anything in the chat that comes up now. And thanks so much, Chelsea and Deirdre. I'm going to just go on and just start my presentation before we hear our last case study. Hopefully this works for me this time. So as I said, my name is Katie Lowry and I'm here with my colleague Aoife Tunney, and we are the Creative Europe Desk Ireland Culture Office. Sorry, it's just not letting me move ahead. So sorry. So just to briefly look at our program today. Sorry. I am just going to give a brief overview of our work. We're going to look ahead to the next program, which, as I was saying at the top of today, has been officially launched. It will be officially launched on the 17th. I'm going to give you an overview of the main funding strand and then look at some kind of some examples that have been funded here. As I said, there will be another opportunity where we'll go really in depth and do more of an application workshop, but this is really just an introduction. So there are three desks here in Ireland, three offices that make up the Creative Europe Desk Ireland, in addition to ourselves as the Culture Office, and we're based in the Arts Council, who's our national host. There's also a media office in Dublin and a media office in Galway. So media will cover everything related to the audiovisual industry, and the Culture Office kind of covers every other cultural sector, including heritage. So what do we do? So really, we're here to provide information, advice, and assistance to Irish applicants. We promote the program at local, regional, and national level. Increasingly here, we've been collaborating with key sectoral stakeholders and agencies to better deliver our message to the, to individual arts and culture sectors. So in the case of cultural heritage, we have an ongoing relationship with the Heritage Council, and we do events with them and kind of share information on an ongoing basis. Another thing we've started doing is obviously we have the Creative Europe Desk Network. So currently there's 40 countries that participate in the Creative Europe program. So it's broader than just the member states. And in every one of those countries, there's a Creative Europe desk. So we've started kind of engaging quite a bit with that network and collaborating on events and information sharing. Increasingly, because you'll see as we go through this, that these projects, at the heart of them are European collaborations and partnerships. And the Culture Office really has started to provide some direct assistance with partner search requests. And then increasingly, and certainly with this program, we've started to develop cross-sectoral partnerships and events with the media program. So just moving on, and I'm sorry, I'm aware that this is not the full screen share, but for whatever reason, I can't move it forward in that, so, but I will send this presentation after. So why does the EU fund culture? I'm not going to spend too much time on this because obviously Anne has covered that so well in her presentation. So it's important to say that firstly, the EU recognizes the intrinsic value of culture in all of our lives. Culture is something that makes all of our lives better. But then it's also linked to kind of, in a broader sense, to treaty commitments. So you'll always see within, certainly within the Creative Europe program, there'll be something around, the ways in which culture can contribute to international relations and dialogue. But then really it's kind of linking to European policy. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because Anne has done that in her presentation and sent you the links. But it really, when you start to think and you're developing projects, this really has to be at the forefront of your mind. So just here, so what is the EU hoping to achieve? And this is probably the single biggest point I give to people. Really here, all the projects that have come through the Culture Office over the years, there's a huge amount of kind of quality there and artistic quality. But the thing that always needs to be at the forefront of your mind is remembering that funding for arts and culture is another tool for the EU to achieve its social and political aims. And so what these projects need, they always call it European added value, but essentially you need to demonstrate that your project could not be achieved solely at national level. And this is another interesting kind of paradox, because through these projects, which, in a lot of the cases are obviously projects delivering at kind of community or local level, but you'll need to be able to demonstrate a big impact. And you do that by addressing, whatever program you're applying to, you're addressing those particular priorities, and you're also addressing broader sectoral concerns. So if something is an issue for a small regional museum in Ireland, that is going to be a similar issue for a small regional museum in Finland. So it's about kind of recognizing that it's about your individual work, but then you're linking it to a broader priority. So how does the EU fund culture? So it's a couple of different ways. So there's what they call direct funding actions through the Creative Europe program. So we have the European Capitals of Culture. We have a number of prizes. And I'll touch briefly on the European Prize for Cultural Heritage, the Europa Nostra Prize. And then really the main way is through a centrally administered funding program. So just kind of some highlights, I guess, of the new program. And one of the ways is COVID has really been a bit of a silver lining, because when COVID hit, the budget negotiations were they weren't finalized, and the budget was less, it was looking like an agreed budget was going to be less than the 2.4 billion that was actually finally agreed. And that was, through the recognition of how hard the creative and cultural sectors have been hit by COVID and exposing how vulnerable they really are. because really this is about Creative Europe funding is about ensuring that there's sustainability within the creative and cultural sectors and long-term, kind of sustainability contributing to jobs and growth. So it was recognizing it's very vulnerable. There's an increased budget, and it's decided that basically the budget will be front loaded over the first years of the program in order to have as effective response as possible to the legacies of the COVID crisis. I'll go into this after, but this is really could be potentially an enormous game changer for Irish organizations wanting to engage in Creative Europe. The Commission has increased the co-funding that they will put into projects. So what this means is European projects, they'll fund up to a certain percentage, and then the partnership has to raise the additional funding nationally through their kind of national funding partners. So that's going to be, I think, potentially a game changer here. Again, Anne referenced this, but it's aligned very closely with the EU Agenda for Culture and cross-cutting objectives on climate and gender. So no matter what program you're applying to, you will be asked to address certainly asked to address climate and sustainability, and projects that address gender equality or work towards greater diversity and inclusion will be essentially wanted. This is another key one, and it's very, very important for the heritage sector here, a targeted sectoral approach. And what that means is the Commission has recognized that certain sectors have very specific needs, and they want to have targeted funding to address those. So that is a novelty of the new program. Another one, which is fantastic, is there will be an ongoing permanent funding action to support individual artist mobility. So i-Portunus, the funding strand that Chelsea and Deirdre spoke about. And again, this is a really interesting one because it's very, in Commission terms, it's quite a light touch fund, and it's one that can certainly be used to kind of develop partnerships and projects with a kind of maybe a longer term goal of a larger European project. So I'll just move on here. So let's look at the culture priorities, because obviously the Creative Europe program does cover media, does cover film and TV as well, but we'll talk today about the cultural priorities. So you can see the first one would be certainly kind of coming out of a COVID response strategy. So it's focusing on resilience and recovery. It's also looking at innovation and joint creation, cooperation and exchange of best practices, capacity building of artists, and key players and multipliers. So essentially multipliers and key players, what they're recognizing, and you see this all the time, is these projects funded through Creative Europe, some of them are at a scale that they can almost operate as kind of mini funding hubs themselves. So you might kind of have direct funding to the kind of key partners involved in the application, but the project, kind of spider webs out and involves a lot more people there. So we're going to look briefly at the funding strands, and Aoife and myself will be doing a number of events over the coming months on specific funding. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about European cooperation projects. So that's the main project funding strand under the Creative Europe Culture strand. So in general, in past programs, this could represent about 70 or 80% of the total budget. So we're going to focus on that today. But Creative Europe also supports European networks of cultural and creative organizations. We've done events on networks in the past, and this is one that can be a great way if you're looking at kind of, peer learning, peer exchange, and, kind of maybe that could be your start if you're only at the beginning of your journey of, working transnationally or working with European partners. There's also the European platforms for the promotion of emerging artists. This is a really interesting strand, and this is one that the European Commission really found to be a success story of the last program. So that's a really interesting one, and we'll definitely be doing an event on that. We also have formally called Support for Literary Translation, which is now called Circulation of European Literary Works. The i-Portunus mobility strand, we actually have a current open strand, but it's a legacy of the last program. It's called i-Portunus Houses. We've done an event on that, and then the Music Moves Europe. So let's just quickly look at the cooperation projects 2021. So there is a significant increase on the budget for the last funding strand here. So it's a 30% increase on the 2020 call. So there's a projected budget of almost 61 million euro, which is good. And this is a key point for you. 10% of the budget is allocated to sector specific priorities, including cultural heritage. So that's in essence, obviously, if they get, the quality is there, but 10% of that budget will be ring fenced for specific sectors. So that's a really good opportunity. Cooperation projects or Creative Europe funding is open to creative and cultural organizations, NGOs, museums, local authorities, universities. It's very broad. If you can demonstrate that your main activity is in the field of kind of cultural heritage, in the field of culture, and you're not for profit, you would be eligible to apply. The other thing that's great about cooperation projects is it funds a really broad range of artistic and cultural activities. So I think that's really key. One thing I left off here, it's also multi-annual funding. So you'll find it's very hard to kind of secure that kind of funding or have that kind of security in a national or kind of more local funder. But this is multi-annual funding. It also will fund a certain amount of essentially non-artistic or costs more associated with your organization, such as staff time, core costs, and a limited number of overheads. So the current call, it's actually posted today on the funding and tenders portal, web portal. The call is open from today, and there'll be a deadline in September in 2021. And you will be notified in early, it's either I think December or January 2022. The other thing I should say, because I know that's kind of not a huge amount of turnaround time, there most likely will be a second deadline in the fourth quarter. So the regular funding calendar for Creative Europe will be a deadline once a year, usually for cooperation projects in kind of October, November. And then you'll hear in May, so it will return to that. So you will have potentially two deadlines this year. So for any European funding program, you'll need to demonstrate that you're addressing the objectives and priorities of the award. In the case of cooperation projects in the new program, the two objectives are: one, to strengthen the transnational creation and circulation of European works and artists, and also to enhance the capacity of European cultural and creative sectors to nurture talents, to innovate, to prosper, and to generate jobs and growth. So then within cooperation projects, we have specific priorities. So the first one is audience, and that's a legacy that's continuing from the last program. So that's really about increasing European citizens' obviously in engagement with arts and culture, but also engagement with non-national European works. Again, we saw this come in quite strongly midway through the last program, would be social inclusion. So that's another one. And I think if you look at the ways in which a lot of arts and culture organizations here, engage in that kind of collaborative practice.
Shay.
Oh, sorry, I just hear, it could be Anne, I'm not sure. But anyway, I think we're really well positioned under these priorities, which is great. And again, and this is across all funding programs now, sustainability. So projects that can contribute to the European Green Deal, which Anne mentioned. New technology, and this is another one that could be of interest to the museums or heritage sector. So that's about allowing the cultural and creative sector to increase their kind of overall competitiveness. Again, the international dimension, I referenced it early. And so this is about recognizing, that in some ways the European market is still quite fragmented, and there's a lot of, kind of work or projects that are still struggling to be active or compete at international level. So that's one. And then the one we're probably really interested in today are sector-specific priorities. So this is, if you're thinking about engaging or putting in an application, these are the ones that, kind of spend some time looking at and thinking about. So the specific cultural heritage priorities for 2021 seek to reinforce the capacity of the cultural heritage sector or professionals in engagement and mediation with people in the interpretation, communication, and presentation of cultural heritage to develop relationship with audience and stakeholders, taking into account evolving technological and digital methods of content creation and presentation of archived output and drawing lessons learned during the lockdown. So this is a very wordy way of saying, you know, increasing your capacity to essentially exist long-term, you know, within your sector. Another one, and this is a key, and we have had projects funded in this area before, and it's of obviously great interest, would be the digitization of cultural heritage material sites and historical buildings, including the use of 3D and AI technologies. And another one, and you can see this kind of directly grew out of some of the things Anne was talking about, so risk management for cultural heritage, with a focus on the prevention and risk preparedness in relation to natural and non-national hazards, including climate change adaptation and mitigation. So you can see there's a lot there, but it's certainly, again, this is broader than a heritage project. This is about looking at your organization and where you're situated and thinking about ways to build, you know, build resilience in order to be able to kind of exist long-term and thrive in your particular environment. So I'm just going to go quickly on to the cooperation project Strand. So there's two novelties here, which I think are fantastic and could be very good for Irish involvement in cooperation projects. So the first is obviously that they have raised their co-funding. So the EU has raised the percentage of the total budget, project budget that they'll fund. And they've also introduced a third category, so a medium category, which I'll talk about. The other thing that's very good and Ireland has fought for over the years is they've also ring-fenced percentages of the budget for each strand. Because the large scale, they're enormous projects, and there's always that fear that you know, fewer projects, even large projects, could take up more of the budget, but this has been addressed here. So category 1, you need to have a minimum 3 partners from 3 different participating countries. And the EU will give you a grant of up to 200,000, which can be 80% of your total budget, meaning that now the partners within this project would have to raise 20% through their national funding sources. The new strand is called a medium strand. And this is very interesting because what the Commission would have found is it was a very hard leap to go from the kind of small to the large. And so there were some small projects that were involving a huge number of partners, yet the grant level was relatively low, even though it's still quite a large project. So category 2 will need to involve a minimum of 5 partners from 5 European countries, but the grant goes up significantly to €1 million or 70% of the total budget. So this one could be, I think, of huge interest here. And the last one is what's called a large scale project. And that means you will have to have a minimum of 10 partners from 10 different European countries, but the grant there goes up to 2 million or 60% of the total budget. So just quickly, so, you know, if you kind of looked at how Ireland engaged with the project, it was mainly through the cooperation project strand, and it was mainly through the smaller scale project. So there were 68 Irish organisations involved in Creative Europe funded projects over the last 7 years of the programme. And this translated to overall project grants of 45 million and direct grant aid to Ireland of just over 5 million. So if you look statistically, we actually did quite well within the programme. If you looked kind of, you know, as an average over all the countries. So Ireland represented 2.26% of the overall funding allocated through Creative Europe. And our success rate averaged just over 36%. And then I think over the overall success rate for everyone participating was 23%. So you can kind of see there that the quality is really there. So when applications do go in, you can see that Ireland actually does quite well. We also have quite a wide geographic spread. So we don't necessarily have a track record of partnering with, you know, the kind of closest or neighboring countries. So we've partnered with 34 countries out of a possible 41 because the last program included the UK. So I've just pulled together, and I can send these as links after. The first two are quite interesting because, again, they're both large scale projects, and as I was referencing before, they kind of are acting as mini funding hubs themselves. So what I always say to people when you're starting the journey of, starting to look at Creative Europe or look at European funding, it's a really good idea to start following active live projects, because a lot of opportunities come out of there. A lot of opportunities, for mobility exchange, for training, professional development. So, I'll send you all the links, but it's good to look up. Another interesting one. So, I think Limerick and water has certainly been well represented at European level, is the Memory of Water project with the Irish partner Ormston House. A couple of really interesting projects there. If you see the Imagining Sustainable Glass Network, that's a really interesting project where it looked really at a very specific sector and thought, how do we professionally develop and build capacity within there. An interesting museum project was the Follow the Vikings project. Dublinia was the Irish partner, and that was it was very much around kind of new business models and capacity building. So recognizing that smaller museums could come together and kind of leverage their joint, their joint expertise, but also, one of the big things was able to look at ways of generating income through their kind of, gift shop, where, suddenly you have a buying power of a 27, kind of person or organization network. Another interesting one that was an example, and we've had a few, it was a theatre project that was actually funded through a dedicated cultural heritage strand that was there for the European Year of Cultural Heritage, is Legend of the Great Birth. So that's an interesting one to look up. Just briefly, again, the Europa Nostra, some really interesting prize winners we've had over the years. So the most recent one that was just published was 18 Ormond Quay Upper. So it won under, so Europa Nostra has a number of different categories that projects are put forward under. So they won under the conservation category. Really interesting award, and it's a fantastic story, is Jim Callery from Strokestown House, and he was put forward and won in 2017 under the dedicated service category. Recently, the Little Museum of Dublin and Photo Walled Garden were awarded under the Education, Training and Awareness Raising. So that's a good one to look up, because you'll see examples of kind of essentially kind of your peers in Europe and the work they're doing. So just because I'm aware I've taken a lot of time here, just some kind of final thoughts of, where to get started. So, what I always say to people is, obviously European funding is not for everyone, but I really feel passionately that it's something that you should, at least be looking at and thinking. So one thing to start doing is start looking at your organization's kind of current and future plans and activities, and seeing areas where they align, or if this is something if your organization could benefit or is interested in collaborating with peers across borders in Europe. This is definitely something to look at. I think if you're trying to build this kind of work on top of an already existing, kind of very busy national program, it can be difficult. But if it's aligning with some of your future plans, it's fantastic. Look really closely at your own organizational capacity, because taking part in a European project requires a certain level of administrative capacity, and you need to kind of look clearly. Some things that people do here, if they're, if capacity is really an issue, if they're a tiny organization, is you might look at partnering with another organization, or perhaps, a local council, and addressing capacity that way. We had a really interesting project in Waterford called Murals for Communities. It was an artist, Adele Tobin, and she had a really small, I think the company was just herself, but she partnered with Waterford City and County Council, who put in the application and administered it here on her behalf. So obviously the first step is also, looking at your kind of assessing your kind of current local and European contacts for partners or collaborators. start conversations early with your kind of essentially your national funders or stakeholders, you know, and say this is something we're interested in doing, and have them aware of it. Because what you'll need to do is you're looking at, you know, you have maybe a 2 or 3 year project from Europe, but you might be in a funding relationship that requires, you know, kind of annual applications. So start kind of having those conversations with your funders now. Obviously, heritage and culture are funded through other funding programs that might, you know, be in some cases less onerous as a first or as a starting out. So certainly look at Erasmus Plus. There'd be quite a number of cultural projects funded through there. And also sign up to, if you're not already, sign up to our newsletter, and indeed, you know, follow us on social media. So that's me done. I'm going to stop sharing. So we'll have questions at the end, but as I said, Aoife and I will be doing a load of kind of workshops and events over the next few weeks to go into more detail. So if I could get Gemma to turn on her camera. So Gemma Sexton is the head of visitor experience at 14 Henrietta Street, and we're so happy to have her here because it's a fantastic museum, and it certainly had a lot of recognition at EU level. So we love to hear from Gemma. So I'll invite you to share now.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen now. I hope everyone can see that. Katie, can you just confirm? Oh wait, yes, that you can see this.
Yeah, that's fine. I can see it.
Great, thank you. Hi everybody. My name is Gemma Sexton, yes, and I'm the head of visitor experience with Dublin City Council Culture Company. I am, I suppose, in real terms, I was meant to be the backup for this presentation in case anything happened to my CEO, Iseult, and she is unfortunately, yes, she has COVID at the moment, so she's unable to present today. So so please bear with me. I'm going to be presenting her presentation, and I'm going to be talking about how important, I suppose, the development of 14 Henrietta Street is in relation to the policies that frame it, both at Dublin and city level, national level, and then I'll reference kind of our involvement on the European stage, I suppose, European level. So just to introduce everybody to, if you're not familiar with our building, and I should say, I suppose, I'm head of visitor experience in the museum, and I manage kind of all the sites that the company operate at the moment. So there's two sites. There's one in Richmond Barracks and there's one in Henrietta Street. And I suppose I see my role not only managing the day-to-day operations of the building and ensuring the visitor experience goes smoothly, but it's also making sure that the strategy that's in place for our company that connects with the city strategy for cultural heritage, that is implemented on a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of, I would see my role, and my team would be very clear on that. So that I suppose this is an unusual company for me. I suppose the first time that I'm kind of thinking at strategy level, trying to think on a day-to-day basis within the framework of my role here, connecting with members of the public. Was pre-COVID, and hopefully we're reopening this July. We're looking forward to reopening then. So the 14 Henrietta Street is a social history museum of Dublin life. It tells the story of 300 years of people living in this house on this one street. And this house itself was built in the mid-18th century. It was built on the first Georgian street in Dublin. It's a very unique street. It's the most intact Georgian street of its kind in Europe, I suppose, surviving. It's very unusual that there's been no buildings kind of knocked down or replaced on this street. So it's a very special street. And the house itself, what we do is, I suppose, and it's our people-centered approach, is that we focus on sharing the stories of the people who lived here. And that is, the very first Georgian family who lived here in the 18th century. And then we go through to the tenement times of the beginning of the 20th century through to the 1970s when the last family left. And this is, I suppose, it's a huge contrast between one family living in a house to the 1910s, when you could have over 100 people living in this house, over 15 families. And then by the 1970s, when the house is, I suppose, going into disrepair, and you still have a few people living in the house in what we would see as very difficult living conditions, you know, where sanitation and running water we're never really sorted in this house. So there's a stark reality to the story here. There is a living memory that we're dealing with this story, and I suppose the focus of the visitor experience is about sharing the stories, and these are the three aims that all of our tour guides have when we are connecting with people day to day in the museum. We tell stories. So by retelling the stories of the lives of Henrietta Street, we are preserving and retaining these stories and these testimonies. We also make connections. So that's really important. We all have to be really, really good listeners when we're speaking to people in the museum and remotely as well online these days. So by listening and talking, we're making these connections, and we connect. We're valuing the connections, I suppose, with not just visitors, citizens, but also historians, local residents, former residents and their families. And I suppose as a priority, it's the local community that we prioritize here. And then by doing that, we're looking to uncover history. We want to continue to research the house. We want to continue to uncover the testimonies of people who either lived here or lived in similar tenement conditions elsewhere in the city. And we want to learn from those memories and knowledge of others. So that's kind of what we're about. And then just to explain how the museum came about and the importance of having the right policy. This is what Iseult, refers a lot to when she talks to me about this, is that you really, to be able to develop a good museum like 14 Henrietta Street, you really have to have really good policies as the backbone to really underpin it. So if we go back in time, go back nearly 20 years to the City Heritage Plan, the Dublin City Heritage Plan. This was in 2002. And what this really outlined was, in relation to this street, was the fact that there was a need to conserve and protect Henrietta Street as a whole. By 2002, there was a number of houses on the street that were very close to collapse. And this could have a domino effect, I suppose. If one house collapses, we could put the other houses in danger, and there's many people living on the street, so very important to be able to protect this street for that reason. And secondly, to protect the history that's connected with this street, and that was outlined in 2002 by the City Heritage Plan. By that stage, it was recognised that there were two houses in particular that needed to be minded the most, and one of them is this house, number 14. So a compulsory purchase order was put in place to try and take control of these houses. And that lasted nearly 10 years. So to be able to get the compulsory purchase over the line, we needed to have a Henrietta Conservation Plan. And this was the plan that was put into place in 2006. That allowed the compulsory purchase, I suppose, to go through the courts and to get over the line. And for Dublin City Council to put, I suppose, all of the resources in place to step in and stabilise the buildings that needed the most attention. So that leads us to 2011, and by this point then the houses have been stabilised, and the details then are starting to come into play. So it started to be recognised that not just the physical fabric of the buildings are important, but it's actually the stories that go with them, and it's the stories of the people that lived in these houses that mirror, I suppose, stories across the city and at a national and international level were deemed significant. So that came out of this conservation strategy, and that's where oral history collections started to be mooted and discussed. By 2016, there was a lot of work coming up. By 2016, plans and discussions and chats were in place about putting together a museum. And from what I understand it is that this plan is incredibly important because Obviously, people's roles change. So you could have one heritage officer who says it's very important to have a museum, and we might have a budget for that, and we might have some sort of plan in place. But to have it in a policy format like this, in the city development plan, it protects it. It protects it from changes in politics and budgets, as I said, and roles changing. So by 2016, there was a very serious plan in place that there was going to be a social history museum going into Henrietta Street. And by this stage, there was the oral history collection had started, a whole project had started, led by the heritage officer, working with a team from based in UCD as well. And they were connecting with people locally and recording their testimonies of what life was like in a tenement just like Henrietta Street or further afield across Dublin. So that was really, really significant. And that led to 2017, then when you have the City Council Cultural Strategy. And this came out of, this is where my company came into play, I suppose. The Dublin City Council Culture Company in its former guise was called Culture Connects. And we were in charge of Dublin's European Capital of Culture bid. Now that was unsuccessful, but what came out of that very much was that there was a need for Dublin City Council to really recognise the intangible as well as the intangible, to put in policy format the value of cultural participation and the need for wider cultural access, and that's what's reflected in this policy. And then what came out of that policy is, and what was established out of that policy as well, was the creation of the Culture Company, of which I suppose I'm a member of, and we have our own strategy that we have that falls in line with city strategy to make sure that we are operating 14 Henrietta Street with this priority on cultural heritage, on protecting the intangible as much as the tangible, and that we are, you know, keeping, I suppose, the focus on our people-centered approach and this constant state of, I would say, cultural consultation. You know, that this is what we do. We do a method. Our methodology is called tea and chats, and it's basically sitting down with people when we're allowed to sit down with them for tea and chats, or doing it remotely, and finding out what is important to them. That's really, really important in feeding into policy. So the governance itself, in terms of the Culture Company and the Henrietta Street as well, is it's participatory. It's incredibly democratic, and it involves all of this list of different types of people that feed into it. So you have former residents of the house, front and centre. They're the heart and soul of kind of what we do here in the museum, and we have to make sure that that's always at the heart of what we do, is consulting with former residents and making sure that what we share reflects the authenticity and the stories of what has been shared with us. We consult heavily with historians, so we have different historians that are, you know, are expert in different time periods of the house, and they work with us very closely. We connect and consult with the local community, cultural and heritage sector experts. We connect with local artists, local authority representatives, and we also connect with cross-sectoral advisory panels. Just an example of this gentleman here who you can see in this picture is Peter Brannigan, and he was born in this house back in 1939. Yes, he's 82. Yes, at the moment. So he was born in this house, and he has been involved in the development of this museum since 2013. He knocked on the front door and met the Dublin City Council team when they were developing and protecting and stabilising the building, and he's been involved with the museum ever since. So people like him are front and centre, as I say, and are the heart of everything that we do. So as I mentioned, really, you know, my job is retaining the authenticity and the relevance of the experience. And our team, it's sustaining and retaining that relevance that's really at the core of everything that we do. So we continue to active listening, we continue to tell and collect testimonies and these oral histories, And that's really important. I suppose it's our responsive programming in the museum, is that we recognise once we were open that the oral history project that happened before the museum opened was so significant, but the work didn't stop, or shouldn't stop really. And so we developed a new programme called Your Tenement Memories, where we actively listen on a continuous basis. We went out into the suburbs where we moved to from the tenements to try and capture that. We invite people to the museum. We welcome phone calls every day from people who want to share their stories with us, both informally and formally. Any way we can capture those stories or listen to those stories and share those stories, we do. And we share them as part of our visitor experience. So yeah, that's what we say here, human-centered approach. And then this slide is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm not going to read everything, but it does repeat a little bit of kind of what I was saying, is that it's really important that obviously the policy is the backbone. It gives you the springboard to be able to do what you're doing in terms of this museum, to be able to put intangible heritage as a priority as much as the tangible, to be able to focus on community participation and cultural access. That those policies allow us to do that, allow us to carry out our visitor experience here in the museum, to respond well to kind of what we're hearing, and to be able to put together different programs. So we're putting together a mobile museum at the moment, which is, I suppose, one of our outreach ventures. The Your Tenement Memories continues, and that will be an ongoing process because we're dealing with living memory. And this kind of goes in a circle because we're now feeding into future policies. So at the moment, we have a cultural impact strategy that some of my colleagues are working on to feed into the new city strategy. And we also have, we are also members, I suppose, of the working group for the new heritage plan as well. So this is really important to ensure the relevance of our museum, and to ensure that I suppose that everything is lined up so that we can continue to do what we do in a way that we see as best practice, but also to ensure that it is best practice. This is a long list of different awards that the museum has won, but what I'll point out here is just the last couple of awards that have been at a European level. We recently were nominated for the European Museum of the Year in 2020, which was just recently announced, and we won the Stiletto Prize within that, and that goes to a museum which has shown excellence in involving its local community in planning and developing museum and heritage projects to enhance the public quality of the museum. So of all the awards, I suppose we're most proud of this one because we feel it really reflects our approach to how we do things in the museum. But there are other awards here, and in particular myself personally, the Council of Europe, Europa Nostra European Heritage Day Stories Award in 2019 was a really important one, and for me in particular, just to see how this works at a European stage, in that we applied for this award by just, explaining what we do, and we got invited to Strasbourg to present, which was lovely, of course, pre-COVID. And when I got to Strasbourg to present how we do things, what's really important is not only the validation and the recognition of what we have done at a European level, but also to meet peers, to kind of see what other museums are doing and to see what best practice looks like across Europe. That was really, really important for us, and for us to continue to strive to be in those conversations and those rooms and those types of meetings is really important for us in this museum. So I'm just going to finish now with a short video that we put together for the European Museum of the Year Award. I think it really sums up everything. Well, I hope it sums up better what I've been discussing, but also everything that the museum is about. And I hope it makes it clear that, we're really connected with policy, with the policies of the city, and we are constantly checking ourselves, I suppose, to make sure that we're maintaining our relevance and putting our connection with people and with culture and cultural heritage first. Okay, so I'm going to press play now.
Henrietta Street is a house in the northern city of Dublin, but it brings you on an incredible journey from the kind of grandeur of the 18th century, when a single family lived here, to a very different reality. Dublin in the early 20th century, a city that was defined really by tenements, poverty, and great hardship. So in a sense, the entire story of Dublin is within these walls.
In order to make the museum at Henrietta Street, there was a conservation and heritage policy of the City Council that allowed for the restoration of this building into this museum. And with the conservation approach, which is kind of trying to do as little as possible, but as much as needed, it was possible to restore this beautiful building into the social history museum that it is. It's really important for us that former residents and a huge cross-sectoral group of professionals and experts are involved in the running of the museum, not only now, but also in the development of the building into a museum. So over the past 5 years, there's been different makeups of advisory groups that have all included experts, former residents, and people who are involved in their local community.
50% of our collection is made up of the building itself. So that's the bricks and mortar, the doors, the windows. The building is a primary artifact in our collection. 25% of the collection is the memories and stories and voices connected to this building. And if the building is at the core of what we do, these are very much the heart and soul of the narrative here. 20% of our collection are the objects that you see on display here when you visit the building. 5% of our collection is the artistic responses that you see on the tour. They're about adding to the narrative and continuing the story of this building. There's a fifth element to our collection, and that is our engagement.
I think any good museum has to have a dialogue going on with the people around it. And from the beginning, 14 Henrietta Street has really prioritized getting the stories of the people. Historical archives will tell you everything about the state, about politicians, about architects. But what historical archives generally don't give you is the lived experiences of ordinary people. So it's been really, really exciting to work with this museum in trying to gather the stories, not only of those who lived in this very building, but people who lived in buildings like this one, and to put the stories of ordinary people center stage.
I got involved in the revival of the house through the reminiscent groups and sessions, and we just reminisced and told their stories, and people would say things that would, you know, reignite your memory, where, oh, I forgot about that, or I remember this and I remember that. They really, really, really did their research, spoke to people. They just didn't decide this is the way it's going to be. They actually listened to everybody that lived it. This is so, to me, it's live.
You can come in and you can do a tour, but you can also share a memory that you have or a family history, something that you want to tell us, and we can share that. Again, you might remember a particular song, and it might be a song that you've remembered and you've talked about, and then you come and visit us again and we're singing your song.
When we gather stories, it's really important that we respond with our programming to those stories and the lives that we hear more about. So in addition to adding constantly to the content of the tour, we also run other programs that are about collecting more memories and telling more stories. And this kind of responsive programming is really essential to our audience engagement in the way that we run our museum. It is this continuous cycle running over and over again that keeps people at the center of what we do.
It's hard to believe the young people that ran around in the streets in his bare feet, the respect that had been shown by everybody that works in this house. I was actually born in this room here. Yeah, so I advised him in lots of little ways, a piece of furniture, or how is this house situated, you know, bathroom, toilet facilities, all that sort of thing. And that has become really, really like home again to me, because if I want to hear my mother and father and my brothers and sisters, this is where I come from. I've always come, that's why I come to this street. That's why I come to the house. Because I can hear their voices. I feel so humbled. I was allowed to be part of what's happening here today. I really just very great.
Sorry, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that last video. I always tear up when I see Peter talking at the end. Sorry, it's just a little bit emotive. But for us, I suppose just to say that that you know, opportunities like this to be able to tell our story is really, really important, and to be able to connect and keep learning. That's part of our own strategy of what we do every day. Thank you very much.
Sorry, thanks a million, Gemma. That was brilliant. Really, really enjoyed that. So we've kind of come to the end. So I don't know, Leona, if there were questions for anyone, but if people want to, don't have to, but if they want to kind of turn their camera on and ask a question, or maybe Leona has some from the chat.
Yeah, I don't see any. People are shy today, but yeah, don't turn on your camera. Or just nice comments about, yeah, congratulations to Henrietta Street and the Dublin City Council Cultural Company in winning the European Prize of the Year award, the Stiletto Prize. I think it's an incredible achievement.
That's great. Just trying to see. So no one has any questions. We were very excited to be doing this event on the day that the program is actually online. Well, as I said, I mean, we will have, sorry, I have to stop my video for a second. Sorry, my kids are off school today and it was getting, had to shout at them there for a second. Yeah, if there's no questions, I mean, really it's just to say that we're here. You can follow up with us after. We'll be getting out in the next kind of day or two, because the program has now, or the calls have been launched. The program will be officially launched on the 17th. This is really our busy time. So, you know, get in touch and maybe kind of digest and read through the presentations and come back with any questions. It was just really brilliant. Thank you to all the presenters for taking the time, to Anne and Chelsea and Deirdre and Gemma. It was brilliant to take the time, and we'll certainly send around all the presentations. But I guess that's everything then. So thanks a million for taking time, and hopefully we'll follow up with some of you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.